Today we are interviewing Fred Morrow. Today's date is August 16th, 2021. What is your full name?
Johnny Fred Morrow, Johnie, Fred Morrow.
What year were you born?
I was born September the 11th, 1940.
What were your parents' names?
Kenneth A. Morrow and Irene Fulmer Morrow.
I went to school with some Morrows in Mineola. Were you related to them?
No, they had a daddy named Kenneth too, and they had a bunch of boys and one girl, and they had a Jerry, as did we, but no kin so far as we knew.
What was your father's occupation?
Well, when I was born, in the first years of our life, he was a farmer, worked seasonal in the oil field, got his back broke, and he became a barber here in Quitman, worked the second building down for many years, from probably about 1954, 55 till sometime in the 80s.
What school or schools did you attend in Wood County?
I attended the Oak Grove School in the first grade in 1947. They consolidated with the Lone Star School that year, and so in 1948 we had the new building, which is where S&L Furniture is on 2088, and the building was not finished, so we went to school in the Ebenezer Baptist Church until it was finished. That year we no longer walked to school, but had a school bus and a lunchroom. If you had a nickel, you could eat.
Did they have a name for the lower grades?
It was just grades 1, 2, 3, 4 was one room that was Sarah Womack from over at Golden. Sarah Blackwell Womack from Golden taught those. And then grades 5, 6, 7, and 8 was the upper class. And T.A. Browning, who was later county judge, he taught that the first year. After Concord consolidated with us, we had 3 classes, and Miss Ludy Granberry was one of the teachers, but mine was Miss Womack, and by then T.A. Browning had moved on, and Herman Gilbreth and his wife were teachers, and he taught me until midterm of 7th grade, and my dad moved to Quitman, and we went to Quitman School, junior high and high school, and graduated there in 1959.
What was the highest grade that they taught at Oak Grove?
8th grade. Earlier, I think possibly 7, when my parents attended there. And Daddy went to school there from about 1918 till he finished, and then he attended school in Mineola where he could play football. And I suspect he may have lived with his mother's sister, Bessie Rapp. And mother, after finishing school, she attended East Texas Normal at Commerce, later teachers, and she taught in Haynesville and Stout.
Do you know how the Oak Grove School got its name?
No, that's the community name. I was born and lived there and never had anybody to tell us how they got the name. There was oak trees all around in the community. The church, however, is Ebenezer Baptist and Ebenezer Cemetery in Oak Grove there. And I don't know how they got their name either. William Sims is about 7 or 8 years older than I am, and he's the oldest. Well, my aunt Hazel Morrow may have gone to school at Oak Grove, but William Sims possibly could give you more information on that.
How old were you when you started the school?
I had to wait until I was nearly 7 because my birthday came after the cutoff date of September the 1st. So I was nearly 7. I had, at that time, 4 older brothers in the school there.
How did you get to school each day?
We walked from our house, which was on County Road 3145. It didn't have a number then, but we walked along with the Sims family, and the Wheeler family, and all other families from there. And we walked to school. We did not have a lunchroom, even though the school was 4 rooms and had an auditorium. And we carried our lunches.
How far did you have to walk?
It was probably 2 miles if we went around the road, but when weather permitted, we walked through the woods, cut off a half a mile maybe.
Where was the school located?
At the intersection of what is now 2088 and FM 14. There's a fellow named John Smith did own it. It was a big schoolhouse with 2 outhouses, and we had a water well pump you had to pump it to get your drinking water. And of course, I think John's got a house there. It's on the northwest corner of that intersection.
Did it have a lunchroom?
No, not when we were there, and I don't think did when my parents attended there.
But it had an auditorium.
Upstairs, the whole floor was an auditorium, but that was off limits for us to go up there. I know there were stairs when you walked in from the outside. There were stairs on either side. The schoolhouse actually faced kind of to the south, slightly southeast, and we were not allowed to go up there. Miss Icy Reed, who was my teacher there, and Sally Douglas Winkle, they would tear your hide up if you went upstairs. We had wood heaters in the classroom.
Did it have restrooms?
No, it had 2 outdoor toilets. The boys was on the east side, northeast corner, and the girls was on the northwest corner of the place. And again, that was off limits for either the opposite sex to go near those.
What were the roads like?
It was dirt roads. They eventually, some of the roads were oiled. 14 and 28 were both just all roads at the time. Later became farm to market highways.
Did anyone ride a horse or wagon to school?
Not in my day. I think maybe back when Dad and Mother were going to school, kids that lived too far away, they did, and some of them, their parents brought them, but no one had a car that they drove to school. The furthest I remember anybody coming from was after you crossed 154 down in the Wayside community. The Bowman and the Bradshaw kids had traveled the greatest distance to get there. Of course, when you think about a teacher teaching 4 classes in one room, there wasn't but 5 kids in the first grade. It was Thomas Sims, William Ray Bradshaw, Gay Ann Cornelius, Wanda Joe Oxford, and me. And I'm the only one that's still living.
What did you do if it were raining?
Well, you ran like the Dickens to try to get under a shade tree to get there. And sometimes Daddy would come in an old pickup truck. Daddy delivered ice right after he came out of the war. And sometimes he'd come after that. You pile 5 kids in a single cab truck. Pretty cozy.
And snowing?
Usually stayed at home.
Was there ever a tornado that damaged the school or a fire?
Not to my knowledge. Now, in 1919, when my parents were preteen kids, Dad would have been 9, Mother would have been 10. They called it a cyclone, came through Oak Grove and destroyed both my grandparents, Henry Fulmer and Albert Morrow's houses, and lots of other houses. The old records indicate there were people that were killed and buried alive there in the community as the cyclone passed through the Concord community over Oak Grove. But that was 1919, before my days.
Do you remember what time school began in the morning?
I assume that it was 8:30 because we had chores to do before we went to school, and I think we got out at 3:30. And again, you didn't play around, you went home, you had chores to do again. We started to school in September, and I well remember in October we had to pull out of school and pick cotton because it was ready, and you didn't have farm hands except your own, and that also meant new shoes and some warmer clothes for winter.
Do you remember any of your teachers?
The first grade teacher was Icy Reed. The second, third, and fourth was Sarah Womack, and then the fifth, sixth, and midterm of the seventh was Herman Gilbreth. It was quite a shock to come to Quitman School. Instead of having 4 grades in one room, and you had one grade, one teacher. And we had a principal named R.P. Womack that was the junior high principal. And of course, Sarah Rainwater McIntosh taught in high school, but Joel Blaylock Rainwater taught in the elementary and was one of our teachers. And superintendent's wife, Vila Reeves, Sidney Reeves was superintendent, and his wife was the 7th grade teacher. And in the 8th grade, they had several different teachers that would come and teach math or English or whatever.
Did you ever pull any tricks on your teachers?
No, I was scared to death because the rule was if you got a whipping at school, you got one when you got home. However, when Sarah Womack was teacher at Oak Grove, we were not very good students, but when she was up at the chalkboard writing, she couldn't see who was doing what, and sometimes suspicion caused her to look at me, and she would put you in the closet. And the closet in that day, all the classrooms and the closets had high ceilings in them. Probably to a kid, it probably was 10 foot, but it seemed like it was the sky. And she'd put you in there in the dark. And when you was in there, you were supposed to sit in that cool, dark room and think about what you'd done. But I learned that you could climb up those bookshelves, which were stationary wooden shelves, and I could eventually feel around and could find the string. Didn't have switches, you had pull chains, and I could find it, so it wasn't too bad to be in the closet.
What were some of the supplies that you had to bring to school?
You started out with a big chief tablet and a lead pencil, and that was basically all you had to have. And you know, consequently, you would be sitting in the 1st grade. My brother Jan was in 3rd, so you heard the teacher teaching us, them, in the next 2 classes. And you picked up a lot of things that when you got to that class, the word bored was not mentioned, but you probably were bored. But if you said it, you would have got a B-O-A-R-D to you.
Who were some of your friends?
Well, you know, all of my life, my brothers were my best friends, particularly the one just older and just younger. But we walked to school and to church with the Sims family who lived next to us, which was Thomas and Gerald and William. And Thomas and Gerald are deceased. William's still living there at Oak Grove on his uncle's place right north of where the school was. And of course, when you got over into Lone Grove, and they brought all the people from Concord, but Concord was a world away, you know. We didn't have means of transportation to go over there. First time I was ever at Concord, Slim Walker had cotton there on the old Ziegler place and couldn't get anybody to pick it, so we picked it during the Christmas holidays. And for you people that don't know country life, when it rains, fall rains falls on cotton that should have been picked in October, it causes it to string out of the burrs, so you've got to get way down here and push up, and then you picked it out of the burrs. You didn't pull burr and all. And that was a world away for us.
So can you describe the structure of your school?
Yes, sir. Very easy. When you walked in the door, which was down on the south end of it, to your right, the first classroom was where Miss Sally Winkle taught grades 5, 6, 7, and 8. You went further down the hall, and there was where Miss Icy Reed taught grades 1, 2, 3, and 4. Across the hall from our room was another classroom, and God only knows what was in it. We weren't allowed to go in it, or the first one across from Miss Sally's, and like I said, there were steps on either side of the hall that went in and went up into the auditorium. And I don't recall ever being up there but one time, and I don't know what it was all about. I remember the assembly that we had when they were talking consolidation after the war. So many rural people went to the cities, and therefore the Lone Grove School, Lone Star community, their school attendance had gone down. Ours had at Oak Grove, and so they were having a consolidation election. Well, Miss Sally Douglas Winkle, also known as Shug to her husband, of course we didn't get to call her that, she had all 8 classes to come sit in her room, and she wanted us to tell why that we didn't like her. Well, excuse me, we were not the ones that were voting. Our parents were. And parents did not discuss items like that or finances with their children back in the days. And so she, you know, consequently, because there was a classroom full of students grade 5, 6, 7, and 8, we had to sit in the seat with somebody else. And of course, she would call everybody by name. And she'd say, "Why don't you like me?" Well, you know, kids said, "Oh, I like you, Miss Sally." They're afraid not to, afraid they'd get the board. And she got to my brother Bud, who Morrows have been known to be outspoken, and she said, "Bud, why don't you like me?" He said, "Because you are so darn silly." And she just burst into tears, and of course, I think that may have ended the interview for fear of what some of the rest of them might say when she got to them. So that I well remember. The General Assembly was held in her room. You stood outside, you marched in an orderly fashion. She had a bell, and similar to what somebody showed me back here, and they rang that, and you came in. You had recess, it was called then, and had one in the morning, one in the evening.
How large was the school lot?
Well, to a kid, it seemed huge, but I doubt if there was ever 2 acres there. But as the highways came in and widened, they constantly pushed it down, and I doubt if there's an acre that is still there at that particular location. Now, when they consolidated with Lone Star, they got halfway between, and they took one word from the word Oak Grove and one from Lone Star and called it Lone Grove. And I think that they probably had 3 or 4 acres that they got from the from the McCorley, O.C. McCorley. And at one time, we had an area large enough to have a softball field and a basketball court, and they had what they call a teacherage where Mr. and Miss Gilbreth later lived in. And you lined up there at the front, you had a flagpole, you said your Pledge of Allegiance, and you marched in an orderly fashion to your classroom. The lockers were in the hall in Lone Grove. I don't remember having lockers at Oak Grove. I suppose they did, but I don't remember that part. But you had a place to put your coat, anything else that you may have carried. And it had an auditorium, stage area. It was all one level. And there was 2 classrooms on the left as you went in. The building faced the east, one on the right, and then the auditorium stage was on the right, on the north side.
Where was the playground?
It was to the south of the school and south of the lunchroom. And again, when you went to the playground, you were not allowed to come in. Of course, we had restrooms in this facility. The boys was between the first 2 classrooms, and the girls was on the other end. One day, T.A. Browning, who was upper class teacher when we first went there, was also the school bus driver. And 2 guys, Charles Marshall, who owns Marshall's Barbecue in Dallas, and Bobby Powell, got in a fight on the bus. So Mr. Browning stops the bus on the west end of the building, lets them get out. And I mean, they were fist fighting. He let them slug it out. Of course, all of us little kids got over there, big-eyed, blood flying. And when they got through fighting, Mr. Browning, who was much bigger round than I am, took his belt off and he wore them out. And you know, we never had another fight on the school ground after that. It was a great deterrent to fighting.
Did the playground have any equipment on it?
It just had a post, which was probably a tree with a backboard made of wood with a goal. I don't recall a net on it. And I'm not for sure that they had 2 goals. And later, I know the softball field, they did put up a barrier back there to keep the ball from going and hitting the teacherage down there.
Was there a swing set?
Yes, swing set and a merry-go-round near the lunchroom.
What did you do at recess?
Well, we would play on the merry-go-round, swing, and they would choose sides and play ball, either basketball or softball. On Fridays, it was a big event. On Friday afternoon, you went to other common schools, we call them rural school then. You might go to Cartwright or Coke or Pleasant Grove or Caney or New Hope. And at one time, I think they still were having school at Little Hope. So that was a big event. And I'm not for sure if they let all the kids get on the buses and go, or whether you had to be in the upper classes to go.
Was there something called playground ball?
Well, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Seemed like you would, choose, you would draw a ring, and they would, everybody would get in the ring, and then there would be somebody chosen for this side and that. and they'd see who could hit them with the ball and get them out. You hit them with a basketball, the best I remember.
Were there any special programs or parties at Christmas?
Yes, they'd have a community Christmas and at Long Grove, never at Oak Grove, and people would bring gifts, and usually it was something very small. It might be a pair of socks or a piece of fruit. You got candy. Santa Claus came, and I know there's a guy named Bozo Hines that was a friend of my oldest brother, and my parents neither used tobacco, and I remember that he put a cigar under the tree for my daddy and snuff for my mother, and they figured out real easily who did that, and so he would come and stay at our house weeks at a time. So mother was a great cook and made biscuits every morning, so after that, a few days after that, we went to the breakfast table, homemade biscuits, instead of being on a plate in the middle as usual. Everybody's plate had a biscuit on it. Bozo went to open his to put butter. We had our own cow and butter, and he couldn't get his fork in, so he tried a little harder, and he couldn't get it in, so he tried hard, and when he did, it slid right off of his plate and was up eye level. And Daddy had got up, and Mother told him which biscuit, and he put cotton in it. And so she baked it, and it looked like all other biscuits, but the contents was different in size. So Bozo never pulled tricks like that on Mother and Dad again.
Were there other celebrations at other holidays?
Well, of course, at the end of school, we always had a stew, and all of the parents came and bought. Somebody would bring a chicken. I don't remember beef stew because back in the day, not too many people processed their beef, and if they did, they carried it to the Wood County Locker plant, which was part of Wood County Electric. But they'd bring their chickens, and they had a big black wash pot out there, fire built under wood, and they'd cook it, and people would come, bring desserts, and that was celebration at the end of school, and we would have that. And then there were certain times of the year that they would have a film, and I don't remember what any of the films were about, but I know one of them was about an iron claw, and it was a continuation. And, people would be out parked or at home, and this iron claw would reach through the window, and boy, it was a good thing you had a big brother to sleep with that night to keep the boogers off of you, iron claws. But I remember that, and we had a woman named Ms. Oley, and she would spell her name O-H, and get boys and girls, what does that spell? L-Y, Oley. And she would come and tell Bible stories. She did flannel graph stories and did Bible stories about creation and everything. And, it was good that you could have those kind of programs in the school. She came every year, it seems like, but then after we got to Quitman, well, I never heard tell of Ms. Oley again.
Was there an organization like PTA?
Yes, probably after we got to Quitman. I don't recall ever hearing of it out at Long Grove there. My parents did not participate a lot in the school because I'm one of 9 children. I'm the middle, and there were 6 of us when my dad volunteered to go to World War II. And after he came back, there was another one born in 47, another in 48, another in 53. So they always had babies at home. And of course, Dad was so nervous after the ravages of World War II until he didn't choose to be in crowds, and Mother stayed home, raised babies.
Did your school, like at Oak Grove or Lone Grove, did they have sports teams that competed with other schools?
Yes, they would, when they went to these other schools to play softball, I don't remember it ever being baseball, they would have a team that would compete against them, the boys and the girls, and you know, it was pretty fierce competition, particularly with Cartwright, because they had some really good ball players over there.
Did you play?
No. I always felt that I had two left hands, even though I am left-handed. I just wasn't coordinated, and after getting in high school, I worked all the time, so I didn't never participate in any sports in high school either.
How was your school heated?
At Oak Grove, it was heated with wood heaters. At Long Grove, we had butane or propane, and had heaters in each of the classrooms, and then in the auditorium, and of course they cooked with it in the lunchroom. Then we got to Quitman over in the elementary school, junior high, where they had it was like steam radiators in the classrooms there, and you know, I never paid that much attention. I was looking at other things in high school instead.
Right. How was the school cooled?
You had to raise the windows in all the school, all 12 years, to have any ventilation at all. There was no air conditioner ever.
If you had an injury at school or skinned your knee, who would tend to it?
Well, usually your teacher, or you would go to the principal, and they would, but you just got up and brushed it off and went on about your business usually.
What were some of the rules that you had to follow at school?
You had to line up when you got there. You had to be quiet. You said the Pledge of Allegiance. You marched in, and should it be raining and you not be able to do that, you went to your classroom, you went to your desk, you sat down quietly, then you said the Pledge of Allegiance in your classroom, and I don't ever recall any Bible reading or anything in the classrooms other than when Miss Oley would come, and that was a general assembly in the auditorium. But you know, the same thing when the bell rang, you didn't all jump up and have a stampede at the door. And of course, when we got in elementary school or junior high and high school in Quitman, they would have fire drills. And again, you had to march out in an orderly fashion. They would sound an alarm in the hall, and you would march out at the assigned place, you know, which door you were closest to, that's where you went out.
What was discipline like?
Well, they knew what a BOARD was, and they could use it, just like Mr. Brown and whipping with his belt, and they sometimes would make the kids bend over the desk and they'd whip them. I don't recall ever witnessing a girl being whipped at all, but boys, yes, and some of us deserved a lot more than what we ever got as far as discipline.
What was your favorite subject?
Recess. No, probably FFA, agriculture, Mr. Virgil Vickery.
When there wasn't a lunchroom, what did you bring for lunch?
Well, Mother cooked breakfast every morning, made homemade biscuits. We didn't have what you all call sliced bread, we call light bread. And the only time that we had that was when we were working in a field too far from the house to come in for lunch. But, you know, she would fix a biscuit and you'd have sausage or bacon in it. Never carried egg products, to my knowledge. And so you'd have that, and you know, basically I don't remember except in the first grade. And of course, after we got in the second grade, you know, a nickel a lunch, that was, you know, 25 cents a week that they had to come up with. And by the time I was in the third grade, second grade, my brother Jerome was in the first. So they had to have 6 kids lunchroom. And sometimes, you know, you didn't know what they were going to have, but because the windows were raised in the cafeteria out there, or lunchroom they called it, they had long benches at the table. You could smell the beans, and they cooked a lot of beans. And I called Miss Gertrude Amoson, whose daughter Tommy Amoson Bradshaw was my successor at the tax office. She cooked there. I called her beans, and Miss Ellie Spagner cooked the potatoes, so I called her taters. And I did that as long as they lived, and then conducting both of their funerals. That's how I referred to them, because their family knew that's what I'd called them. But you ate what was before you. You didn't say, I don't like that.
Now, when you took your lunch to school, what did you take it in? What type
Well,
of container?
We had brown paper sacks that we carried ours in. Of course, some people were known to carry it in a syrup bucket. And, you know, Mother usually always had some type of dessert, maybe cake or cookies or something homemade that she would send with us. So, you know, we made do until we got home, and then usually we could have a snack before we went to the field or to the woods to work.
Was there an end of year awards program or anything?
Not to my knowledge until we got in high school. And then they would carry us down to the auditorium, which was a separate building from the high school. It was sitting on what was the southwest corner of the school ground, which was located on the corner of Morris and Puckett Street there. And they would have awards there.
Do you remember your daily routine at school?
Yes, you got there, and as I stated, you marched in, you went to your desk, you sat down, and when the teacher was teaching your class, you didn't interrupt. If for some reason you felt an emergency to go to the bathroom, the toilet, that's what it was called, you had to raise your hand and be acknowledged and given permission to go. But you didn't create a scene about anything to disrupt the other classroom. And so even after getting into school here at Quitman again, you didn't just have the freedom to come and go from class. You raised your hand and got permission to go.
Well, when you started going to Quitman, how did you get to school?
We walked because we only lived about 5 blocks from the school, and therefore if you lived within a certain distance, you weren't allowed to ride the bus. So
Right.
we walked and walked up Morris Avenue to the schoolroom there, and sometimes when we were there, we'd go home for lunch, and after we got older and got jobs in the community, you could even leave the school ground. I remember some kids walking from the school ground to town to get candy or stuff that you didn't have access to at school. We didn't have vending machines back then. When we was in the 7th and 8th grade, they furnished half pints of either white milk or chocolate milk to the first grade, which was down near the auditorium. And so Troy Williams, a classmate, and I carried that very frequently to those kids down there. And I think the other 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, they were on the west side of where the cafeteria was, so probably cafeteria personnel carried it to their room for them.
Is there anything you'd like to add about your school days? Oak Grove, Lone Grove, or Quitman?
I can truthfully say that I never had a bad teacher. I never had a teacher that was not a good role model, a good example for us. And even though I know I wasn't the best student, I know that the teachers invested in us. Mr. Barber was an outstanding math teacher. He was a walking textbook, and he would come by you when he is trying to teach you algebra and say that's as easy as falling off of a log backwards. And sometimes he'd swat you right good with a textbook on your back as he walked by. But all of my teachers remained my friend, and I probably was the least likely to ever be a preacher, but they respected me, and not very many of them passed away, but what they had not requested that I have a part in it. And there is a saying that a teacher teaches forever. And I saw that in how people treated my mother through all the years, particularly in her latter years, the love and kindness shown to her. And I certainly am grateful for my teachers and wished I'd have been a better student and learned more. But Mr. Barber said pi or square, and I told him mother's was round, but he didn't kill me when I'd correct him on that. So, no, I loved my teachers and thank the Lord for them.
What would you like for people to remember about Oak Grove?
I like for them to remember that in the day that there was a school, that activities revolved around the school and the church in that community, and the people of the community did come together when there was a need and band together. And I wished it was still that way today, that people could see the importance of an education, that teachers could be the role models that they were back then, and invest in the students forever, and that parents would back the teachers in their effort to educate those children.